It's like there's little pieces of skin on the workbench. It's not really, but it looks that way. Dayland with another random making encounter. If you're new to the channel, welcome. If you're returning, are you crazy? You know how much I can talk. Welcome back. Thanks for joining us again, makers, terrain builders, crafters, hobbyist railroad people. Let's talk texture rollers. I know some of you know what those are, but let's talk a little bit more about what they are, what you can do with them. And then in the next video, I'm going to talk about where you can buy them, but more importantly, how can you make them yourself? That's the key there. But for those of you who are new to texture rollers and why you might want to add these to your toolkit, which you definitely will want to, they are a way for us to create complex scale textures for our model making, our worlds that we're building, our terrain. So in less time than I took to explain what they are, I've created this amazing brickwork pattern that I would be able to apply to a building, to a wall, to something like that. I need a cobblestone textured street. I can take my cobblestone texture, I can roll it, and I can have my instant cobblestone street. So that's what they are. Now let's talk about what materials we can use with them. I'm going to arrange these in order here, and we're going to talk about the order. Whoa, easy there on the house. Knocking some stuff around. Move these guys out of the way. I'm going to throw some blue foam in here. We're not going to spend too much time with blue foam, but I'm putting it here because people do use it with texture rollers. So let's left to right it here. This is 2-part epoxy clay. So epoxy compound, 2-part. Super Sculpey, this is a polymer, oven-baked polymer clay. Das Clay, not Das Boot, Das Clay. My German, how is that accent? For those of you who speak German, was it okay? Das Clay, I don't think there's any relationship. And blue foam. Now, I am including blue foam because it's ubiquitous, it's cheap, and we have a bunch of it kicking around, right? Too much. We don't know where to put those 4x8 sheets or 2x8 sheets. The problem with blue foam is it works kinda. You can see here is that cobblestone pattern, but the reality is it works sorta. So I'm gonna eliminate this from our discussion, but know that you can, with some degree of success, depending on the foam you're using, use texture rollers with foam. But we're gonna set it aside. So let's focus on these three. First thing, let's talk about cost. This is most expensive to least expensive, sort of by volume. This is a pound, this is a pound, this is 2.2 pounds or 1 kilogram. Okay, Fix It Sculpt, this is about 30 bucks, 29 bucks, 28 bucks, depending on the time of the day, 30 bucks for a pound. Sculpey, depending on the quantity you buy it in, I'm looking generally at paying $12 to $15. We'll err on the side of $15 per pound of Sculpey. And then air dry clay, this particular clay, I just priced it. We're looking at around 8 bucks for 2 pounds. Most expensive to least expensive, generally speaking. So we're gonna get less coverage, cost us more, you know, more cost per coverage here across the board. So if you're trying to cover large areas or do a lot of stuff, in theory, the air dry clay is gonna be your best bang for the buck. Let's talk about working time. Open time for this. Once you mix it, you are committed, my friend. The clock is ticking. You are gonna end up with a hard piece of cured epoxy in 24 hours, depending on the epoxy you get, come hell or high water, whether you like it or not. So this is open working time for about 3 hours, which really is plenty of time for what we're doing, but fully cured in 24, so no backing out once you mix those two together. Sculpey, I can roll this texture today. I could come back in a week, a month, a year-ish probably, and it would still be pliable and workable. If it's in a fairly sealed container, this stuff almost last forever, as long as the plasticizers don't have an opportunity to oxidize and sort of kind of do whatever weird oxidizer things they do. So sort of indefinite open time until you bake it. Das, as the name implies, air dry clays start to air dry the minute you open them. That's why this package has not been opened, even though it says it can be resealed. I don't want to open this clay until I'm ready to use it, because any air that gets in, it'll start to dry. So open time is very variable on air dry clay. It depends on humidity, temperature, airflow, thickness of material, etc., etc. So open time. How well do these all take the impression of the material? We killed the blue foam for that reason. So it is off the chart because it does not, or off the selection process because it doesn't take the impression well. I would argue that these all take it basically to the same degree. You're going to have varying challenges with each of them. This tends to be sticky, so you have to maybe put a thin coat of water down on the top of your epoxy. So I would put a layer down of epoxy. I'd roll it out, squish it out, put a layer of water down so that it doesn't cling to the roller, roll my texture. This is not as sticky, so you have sort of the reverse issue where it may not stick to the roller, but it also doesn't stick to kind of much of anything else. So you have to use sometimes things like this Sculpey oven baked clay adhesive to get it to stick to things. Das clay, because it's an air dry, a more organic clay, it might be a little crumbly. You might find that it may stick and clog clog the detail of fine rollers. You might have to be a little bit more or less gentle with it. They all take the impressions really well. Okay, safety. This is, in theory, an organic material. It's clay. You know, people put this on their face, not Das clay, but you know, we use clay masks. Probably the safest material on the list. This is polymer. There are plasticizers in it. So when I roll out thin slabs like this, I have a pasta maker that is sort of my sacrificial pasta machine. Not sacrificial in the sense that we perform sacrifices with the pasta machine. That's like the least efficient tool to use for that. Sort of a disturbing comment there. But it is sacrificial in the fact that once you start to use tools and things with the polymer clays, the plasticizers in there get everywhere and you don't want to eat off of it ever again. You can see actually in this piece of cardboard, the darker sort of staining is the plasticizers soaking out of it into the cardboard just in the time making this video. So I do probably want to wash my hands after I make this video as well. So these are of, you know, sort of up the scale of you want to be careful using them. And the same for epoxies. You know, they're a two-part catalyzing material. You know, you want to probably maybe potentially wear gloves with some of this stuff. And so they are become, you know, from a sort of kid-friendly to adult supervision, we're kind of over in that range here. So safety. Overall, I think the big thing that I have as a criteria is knowing what I'm getting into from an open working time. Now in this case, I know that this is sort of an unknown. This is 15 minutes. When I'm ready to bake, when I'm ready to go, I'm happy with my design. It's 15, 20 minutes in the oven and we're ready to let it cool, prime, and paint. Epoxy, 3 hours working time, 24 hours to fully cured. So I know that I need to be kind of overnight with my epoxies. Now you can get different cure rates on epoxies as well. Now with all being said and done, my favorite is hands down going to be Sculpey for 9 times out of 10. I do use the epoxy in conjunction sometimes with the Sculpey, but because I know that I can bake it and be done in 15 minutes, I'm ready to just move on. This is my material of choice. And it's sort of right in the middle price point. Now, what can we do with it? Well, one of the most common things for people to do is create bases for their minis. So you roll out either a layer of epoxy on your base, you squish it out, and then you hit that with your texture roller, or you take your Sculpey, your Super Sculpey, you create your thing, you punch out your shape. I normally work on a piece of glass, tempered glass, that's sort of an oven-safe glass, and I'll just cut it out. I'll leave it so I don't have to mess with it. I'll bake it, and then once it's cooled, I can pop it off without having to worry about damaging it and distorting it and squishing it, and then I'll glue it onto my base. In this case, it's not quite a perfect match, so I might glue it and then do a little bit of carving. Sculpey can be carved sanded very easily when you're done baking it. So it's a very workable material after the fact. So I'd probably glue it down with a bit of super glue, or I might even just find a cutter that's a better size. So I can just rock and roll and go from there. Basing is one very, very common thing. Another thing that you can do is, let's say you want a more specific set piece and you want to put that into your open lock system. You can use just a blank open lock tile. These are free to download. This came straight out of Printable Scenery. They have this free in all sorts of sizes and shapes for download. I could print a flat generic one. I can then begin to work on a piece of glass on my set piece, and then when I'm done, I can take a little bit of super glue, a little bit of glue that on, paint it up, and we're good to go. This is a combination of a cobblestone roller and a brick roller, and then I'm doing a little bit of hand sculpting for the other bits and pieces. One of the last things, couple things, one thing and then another thing. Another thing you could do is, let's say I'm building a structure and I need shingles, not the shingles, but shingles for my roof. I can take my shingle roller, I can roll this out. One of the benefits of working on glass is it clings to the glass, and so it's not gonna lift as much as I'm seeing here. It actually sometimes clings a little too much. That's why it's good to bake it before you start to peel it and stretch it off. But I can have my piece that's going to be glued into my structure. I can create my slab O shingles, use it as my template. I'm not going to press very hard. I'm not lining up very well here. You get the picture. This was a kind of a crappy roll because I actually kind of curved the roll. You have to practice a little bit with them. I can trim it up, and then I can go ahead and pull this out. And what I would probably do in this case is I would either bake it on the sheet, or if you're working directly on a material like this, you'll need to use an adhesive. So I'd lay this down, and then I would drop this on top of it. And then maybe what I'd want to do is do a little bit of sculpting before I bake. So I might want to like take some little details out in areas where I'd want it to be maybe more or less even. I could start to pick out with some sculpting tools with a knife, just cut out so I get a little bit of a feathered edge there, bake it, and now I've got a very nice shingled roof that I can glue in. Then I could come in, I could put a little roof line in. Maybe those I would do by hand, sort of like with the stonework. But I can get a really quick shingle roof. The last thing I'm going to show you is, what if you wanted to do something more organic? These don't all have to be stone architectural. They can be more organic. So let's say I'm working on some sort of a creature and I need scales, because don't we all need scales at one point or another in our lives? Peel that bad boy off. Now, let's say I have an armature, a sculpture, something with more of a curved surface. I can now take it, because Sculpey in particular is very pliable. It's got a lot of stretch to it. I can begin to sort of stretch it and work it around onto my model. And I can build out. Now I might need to do a little bit of squishing. I want to be gentle so that I'm not jacking up the impressions. But I've basically conformed that to my little glass ramekin. without a lot of destruction to the scales. Now, obviously, you got to be thoughtful about how you might piece parts together. Maybe there's a row of scales that are bigger that you hand sculpt. There's always going to be some hand sculpting involved. Texture rollers aren't that one-stop shop, fits all, solves all. You're always going to add additional detail to it, but think about the time it would take to individually sculpt all of these scales, all of these tiles, and you can see that the benefit of texture rollers, it's huge for a lot of what we do. So I hope this has sort of wet your whistle on texture rollers. The next video, I'm going to talk about how we can buy them. Where can you get them? We'll spend a moment on that. The next thing we'll talk about is how do we print them? Do we print them from files? Do we make our own texture rollers? And we'll do a little bit deeper dive into that. So be sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, hit that little bell alert thing, whatever that thing is, so that you know when that next video comes out. Follow me on Instagram, all of that good stuff. Thank you so much for watching to the end of the video. I always appreciate when you spend the time with me. We'll see you back really soon.